Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey friends, we are celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Rural Women Podcast this year, and we are taking a look back through the inspiring stories that have been shared with us throughout the years. Looking back through these interviews, there are women who have been successful, who have persevered, and who have been resilient. There are women who have shared their stories who may not farm or ranch or homestead or work in the business that they used to. Things may be different for them now, but I know their stories have impact. And I hope that this is a solid reminder for those of you who have shared your stories or who are inspired to share your stories. Our stories are forever changing. And just because we may not farm, ranch, or homestead the same, our lives might not look the same. There has been growth here. Through the good, the bad, and the ugly, I think it's a solid reminder for all of us to look back to see how far we've come. So my friends, I hope you enjoy these throwback podcast episodes coming your way, and thank you for being here and for helping me celebrate the incredible stories of women in agriculture through the Rural Woman Podcast over the last 5 years. Enjoy. This week, you'll meet Kimberley Allan.
I'm Kimberley Allan, and I live and farm on the traditional unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, which is on the east coast of Vancouver Island in BC. And I'm actually originally from Vancouver. That's where I grew up. And I've spent most of my life living in cities in Canada. And it's only been in the last few years that I actually moved onto a farm. And so while I had a market garden when I was living in a rural community in northern BC, this is my first farming venture. So our farm here is Gather Farm and Kitchen in the Comox Valley in rural Courtenay. And yeah, we're a 5-acre farm, but we only have a portion of it cleared for our actual farming and our house. And the rest has been left untouched. So it's a beautiful forest of Douglas firs and animals and a creek. And so we're just preserving that for all the animals that we have living on our property here. And we're in a rather special place. We're in Seal Bay. We're very close to the ocean. We can actually hear the seals in Seal Bay. And so its own microclimate when it comes to farming as well. So some of the surrounding farms will have actually different weather than we do. So we have to be very aware of our temperatures and what's happening because it's very different down here by the ocean.
So let's talk more about your climate in where you live. We were chatting a little bit about this before we hit record, and you live in an area that a lot of my listeners probably don't get to experience. Even the thought of growing in all 4 seasons. So tell us what zone you're in, and let's dive into some of the changes that you've seen over the last 4 years at least of being on the island and growing where you do?
I think technically we're zone 8AB, although that's not the best reference point. So we do track our last frost and first frost dates, and we track temperatures throughout the summer and winter months to have a more accurate timing for whether it's seed starting or direct sowing, transplanting, that sort of thing. So we really go based on what overnight lows and daytime highs will have week by week. Part of the other reason that the zones don't necessarily, they're sort of a good reference point, but you don't have to travel too far south. Like if you go South Island, we're mid island, but if you go to the south, they're actually a few weeks ahead of us. And Vancouver, again, a few weeks ahead of us. So that's the other thing to consider in terms of crop planning. You want to definitely make sure that you're using your specific temperatures. And soil temperature here will actually vary compared to a farm only a few kilometers away. So that's an important consideration. And then really, like so many people, we have seen more extreme weather. And we just finished a spell of very cold weather here and a lot of snow. And we don't normally get the deep freeze. It typically happens in February in the Comox Valley. And we had it in December, January. And it was like debilitatingly cold and icy and hard for crews to keep up with because it was so much more than what we're accustomed to and equipped for.
This week, we're talking to Rachael Stewart.
So my name is Rachael Stewart. I'm the mom and the CEO of the Southwest Black Ranchers. We are located in southern Arizona on the border of Mexico in a city called Douglas, Arizona. And we started during the pandemic. We started in 2020, and it was due to the food shortages. So when we saw that they were limiting how much food we could purchase, we decided, okay, let's make a difference and let's try to become part of the solution and not just, try to increase food for ourselves, but try to increase food for others. And then pretty much the more we dove into the food industry, the more committed we became because we saw there's so many layers and levels to it that I don't see how people can't change their lives when they start learning about this stuff. And now with that, we were able to buy some land and we started to begin farming, or we wanted to find a mentor, and we couldn't find any mentors. And we found out that there were no Black-owned farms in Arizona, which is why we chose the name the Southwest Black Ranchers to help increase representation. And then when we found out that there was like a commercial flower farm and there's nonprofits, but there's not any Black commercial farms in the state. And even years now into this, we still haven't found one. So it's something that there's so many levels, like I said, in the food industry with issues that everyone's trying to correct. So it's kind of like pick and choose your battles. So ours, we are trying to build food security and diversity in agriculture, in summary.
Take us back to the early days of the pandemic and what drew you specifically to make this big change and move to where you are and find this land?
Well, with fitness, food is like the foundation of, our lives. So in fitness, it's always like, oh, this many calories or this many macros, or it's, carbs, protein, and fat, breaking it down for people and explaining to them how important our food is and the relationship with your food. And then, protein is really the highest nutrition content food you can eat. Okay. And when our meat source was threatened, because we could only go to the store and get 2 packs of meat. So instead of decreasing my trips to the store, actually, I was increasing my trips to the store because I have 4 children. So, it was down to where I know, like, per how many ounces each child is having, how many meals, that many pounds of meat can be made into. And I had everything down to a T. I had made a complete science out of it. And then it was like, okay, now I need to start producing my own. And how can I do this? You know, how can I do this for others? And, you know, when you see that there's a whole world outside of the grocery store, you know, there's a whole other world outside of the grocery store, and let alone the theories then on how your meat is produced. It's way more than just protein, carbs, and fat. You know, now you can get into the regenerative aspect or how the animal lived, or, you know, there's so many more different aspects to it that I wasn't even aware of or familiar with.
This week, you'll meet Kerri Giesbrecht.
So my name is Kerri Giesbrecht. I own and operate Little Riley Farms up in the Camrose Central Alberta area. How did I get my start in farming? It was way back when I was young. I met my husband in oil and gas, and we had been dating a couple months when oil and gas took a dive, and he decided he was going to move to Manitoba and go farm with his uncle. He looked at me and he goes, "So you can come with me, or this is just over." And being 20 at the time, and we knew a layoff was coming, I just kind of said, okay, let's do it. Let's jump full force into it and moved to Manitoba and jumped into grain farming. I am a born and raised city girl, grew up in the suburbs, high heels, pencil skirts. That was my thing. So name brand everything. So going out to the middle of nowhere in Manitoba was quite the leap for us there. We farmed out there for about 5 years. It was a grain and cattle operation. So when we left, there was 12,000 acres of grain land and 400 head of cattle is what we had. We farmed with his aunt and uncle out there. And then my husband wanted to pursue his flying a little bit more. And I was pregnant with our son at the time. And so we decided to move back to Alberta. So that's closer to our immediate families. So my immediate family is here, and so is his. And so we came back to Alberta and we moved to the city, and we got back into city life. And within 6 months, this city girl was like, I need the country again. So then the hunt started, trying to figure out what we were going to do. And we were going to just do acreage life. That's to eat something the one day. And I grabbed an apple off the apple tree and I said, "Here's an apple." And he goes, "That's not the same as the grocery store." What? I was like, "It's an apple." And he's like, "Yeah, but it looks different. I want the grocery store apple." And that didn't fly with us. So I called up my husband and said, "This kid needs to learn where food actually comes from." And so I kind of told him, and we decided we were going to grab 7 chickens and learn where eggs come from and where some meat comes from. And I said, but he also needs to learn how things grow. And so my husband decided to pull out his tractor and rip up our entire front yard on our acreage and said, "Here's your garden plot. Get to work. Teach the kid where the food comes from."
What is the goal that you are trying to accomplish on your farm right now?
Our biggest goal on the farm is to connect community to where their food comes from, show people where it actually comes from, and that they can ask all the questions. And us farmers aren't hiding anything. We are more than happy to be completely transparent on where your food comes from. And if you have questions, just ask. So a lot of our social platforms are used simply to help show the good, the bad, and the ugly, is what we always say. Yesterday, we were digging up broken water lines. That's never a fun job, but it's something that happens on the farm in the middle of winter. Or the lambing experience, being able to show people that this is where their food comes from. And us farmers that, yes, I raise the lambs for meat. They are born on our farm and delivered to the processor by us ourselves, and they're loved on dearly every single day. Is it easy for us? No, but we also like to eat meat at the same time. And so taking ownership and responsibility for it, and we're going to care for those animals and love on them the whole time that they're in our care, and they are there for a purpose. And just like everything else on our farm, I guess minus the horses, those are more of a fun thing. But everybody on our farm is here for a purpose, even our dogs and our peacocks and stuff like that. So
this week, you'll meet Mady Adamson.
I'm Mady Adamson. I am 9 years old. I'm in grade 4. I live in a small town called Kimberley, Saskatchewan, and our grain farm is just north of Rosetown, Saskatchewan.
You know what, Mady? I have been to both of those places. Can you believe it?
Cool.
I know exactly where you are on the Saskatchewan map. So, Mady, tell us how you ended up starting to share your story in agriculture with others.
Back when I was in grade 3, my grade had been talking about agriculture, and I realized that my classmates didn't really know how agriculture worked or where their food came from. So I made a few videos on the farm, and we posted them on social media, and then they seemed to get popular. So I decided to make a series of videos following the farming year.
And what were your initial videos that you shared with your class? What were those videos about?
So we did a seed treatment video, a seeder video that explained how the seeder worked, and a video about different kinds of crops.
And were any of your classmates surprised with what they saw?
I think so.
Yeah.
They looked surprised.
Were they surprised that you knew how to run this equipment or how it worked?
Yeah, a few of them.
Yeah. How many farmers are in your class, would you say?
Well, there's me and 2 of my other friends are farmers.
Yeah. So what kind of questions do your classmates ask you about farming? What were the things that they didn't know?
Well, they asked me what kind of equipment we used, what different crops we grow, things like that.
Yeah. Why do you think it's important for you to share this information with your classmates and others?
I think it's important so that they understand and appreciate where their food comes from.
Right. Well, and I think that's important, right? Because we all need to eat. So they need to know how that food was grown and where it came from.
Yeah.
This week, you'll meet Hannah Miller.
My name is Hannah Miller. I am a 4th-generation farmer in central Massachusetts. My family has owned our farm since 1935, and for the majority of that time, it was a dairy farm. But my family sold our cows in the late 90s, and so for about 20 years after that, it was pretty much just a hobby farm, and we had a bunch of animals that we just enjoyed having as pets, and we made hay, but there wasn't much production agricultural happening on the farm besides that. And I went to college for agriculture and graduated in 2017 from the University of Massachusetts with a degree in ag, with the goal of going back to the farm and bringing it back into production and making a living here. And so I started dabbling in a bunch of different things that I thought I might like doing on the farm. I got chickens and cows and goats and just tried to learn what worked well for me and what I enjoyed having here and what people in our community were looking for from a farm.
Tell us about goat hiking, what it is, and how you got the idea for it.
So I'm sure that you've heard of goat yoga, right?
Yes.
So goat yoga has become very popular in the last 5 or 10 years, where you can go to a farm and do yoga while being surrounded by goats. And it is best with very small baby goats because they'll jump on your back and, jump all over you. And my goats are dairy goats and they are huge. And so I knew that, and I had lots of people were asking me to offer goat yoga, but I knew that it was not going to work out and would be more like goat parkour, which I didn't want happening. And I had always taken the goats out for walks on my own in the woods, and they do a great job of just staying with me and going wherever I go. They don't have to be on leashes. And I thought, hey, I've never heard of hiking with goats before. I don't know if that's because it's a bad idea or why nobody that I've heard of is doing it. But I thought I'd just try it out and see how it went. And I never would have imagined that it would become as popular as it has. Right now I have over 600 people on a wait list for our goat hikes. And a global pandemic has helped with that, certainly, and people looking to get outside and try different experiences. But It's lots of fun, and it's a great way to get people to interact more closely with animals and in an agricultural setting without just like going to a petting zoo. So it has been a really awesome experience that I never ever would have like thought of or imagined before this.
This week, you'll meet Sarah Bohnenkamp. Give us your rural woman background.
I am somebody who believes in anti-average. Believe that you were born to come here to do some really big work, really big service. And so I love to start there. I'm a champion for anti-average. I'm a champion for the dark horse coming out and just surprising us and changing the world because of that impact. I formally am a coach. I coach leadership and communication. I am a consultant where I get to work with all sorts of wonderful organizations that need strategic planning support or that want help with their communication. And I'm a mama. I have 2 beautiful kids. I'm a horse crazy girl from day one. And I was the executive of a national cattlewomen's association, yet I've never owned a single heifer, steer, bull, calf, any kind of bovine. I think that's kind of cool.
That is very cool. What kind of lessons do you think you've learned from your love of horses and being around horses from such a young age?
I think of the lead mare first and foremost when I think of those lessons. And I love thinking of the lead mare because she is all about the present, right? She doesn't worry about tomorrow. She's not concerned about what happened yesterday. She's worried about right now. And am I safe or am I not safe? Is my herd safe or is there something that's coming down the mountainside that is going to threaten us? And when there is a threat, when there's something that needs her attention, she jumps into action for sake of safety, right? For the sake of the rest of that dang team. And so I think that that's one of the big lessons is lead mare. She's always looking, always watching. She might not always be acting, right? But when she needs to move into action or you ask her to move, then boy, God, you better watch out.
Look out, get out of the way.
Yeah, sometimes with pinned ears and teeth bared, but it's never in, like I want to be a jerk. She's doing it because she wants you to like move.
This week, you'll meet Karin Velez. So start off and tell us a bit more about your time in the U.S. Marines.
So it was funny. From the time I was little, wanted to be a veterinarian, like the furthest thing from military you could possibly think of. My dad was military. He was Air Force, but not during the time that I was alive. That was before I was even born. And I had members of the family who had all been military, but it was actually my high school boyfriend. His dad was a Marine. His grandfather was a Marine. And so from the time he was like 7 years old, he wanted to be a Marine. We eventually got married and, he had some delays going in. And so he didn't end up going in until after we were married. At the time, I was working for a newspaper and I was super interested in writing and broadcasting and all kinds of stuff. And the recruiter already knew that he had my husband locked on. So he turned his sights on me and started, what are you doing? Where are you going in life? What are you working on? And introduced me to the fact that there was broadcasting and public affairs and journalism in the Marine Corps. And I, at the time, didn't even know that there were women in the Marines. This was back in early 90s. I had no clue. And so, of course, me ever wanting to take on another challenge, it's like, yeah, sure. Why not? Sign me up, And so I ended up going through and I loved it. I loved the Marines. I loved being a Marine. But unfortunately, series of events later on, I ended up developing chronic illnesses. And those chronic illnesses forced my early medical retirement from the Marine Corps. And of course, by this time, I'm now a single mom with 3 kids and was living on a military salary, which was fine, but then was retired. And, then there was no salary. I had to figure out what to do from that point. So the good thing about it though, is I met my current husband while I was in the Marines. So that was another good thing that came out of it. But yeah, I absolutely loved being a Marine. I loved the challenge. I loved the physical aspect of it. And I loved the structure of it. So yeah, super proud to be a Marine.
Tell us more about your degree and what you've been able to do with your degree since you've been able to graduate.
So I graduated with a degree in horticulture. My focus was on, organic farming, and part of it was also on nutrition as well, because I became very fascinated with the idea that, what we're putting in the ground and what those plants are pulling from the ground is what we're eating, and how our body gets the nutrients and the micronutrients that it needs is through the foods that we eat. I mean, that idea of you are what you eat is very, very literal. And so I became very interested in soil health. What is in our soil, and does our soil have more than just the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, those big 3? Does it have all those micronutrients that plant needs and that our bodies need so we can get it from those plants? So I became very interested in all of that. And I must have been a teacher in a former life, because I've always been one where if I learn something new, I want to share it with everybody. Everybody that's around me needs to know, hey, guess what I learned? Look at this. Look how interesting this is. It doesn't matter what it's about. I've always wanted to share that information. And so partway through my schooling journey, I realized that I wanted to share that information with people who maybe couldn't afford to go and get a horticulture degree. I got lucky because I still had my GI Bill available from when I was in the Marines. So I had help getting through the majority of my schooling. I still had to get some student loans and stuff, but not nearly to the point where, it was $100,000 or something that I owed at the end of my schooling. So, and I know a lot of people can't do that. A lot of people can't even take the time to go through like a master gardener's class or something like that. So my idea was, well, I'll just take what I learn and what I've learned over the past, however many years I've been doing this, 15, 20 years in the gardens, and teach other people how to do it.
This week, you'll meet Jennifer Spencer. Let the audience know who you are, where you're from, and how you got your start in agriculture.
Well, it's a little bit of a convoluted story, but it's, all of your people that you've had on have such great stories and everything like that. And I think that, we're all unique in all our ways that we come to agriculture. So I come from a too many generations to count farm family. We were born and raised in the backwoods of Shelburne, and that's about a half an hour from where we live now. I farm there as well. So we have 2 sort of locations. But this farm that I grew up on was founded by our Welsh ancestors in 1818. They came and were set up farming, stone walls, miles and miles of stone walls. The children were told to pile the stones as high as the buttons on their shirts. So the stone walls go, those are a big part of our history, our farming history there, right down to my grandfather, who founded a farmer's market. And when I say a farmer's market, I don't mean the farmer's markets of today. I mean the farmer's markets of yesteryear, which were basically a butcher shop on one end, produce from the garden on another, but all from, locally sourced, but mostly brought in by one sort of family that was, operating the farm store. So we grew up there. He passed away when I was 6. So I had, I had some influence there. My father went on to operate like a strawberry U-pick. We've always eaten nose to tail. And my father was an avid hunter as well. So we've always been connected to the land and to nature. I don't know any other way. We just sat dreaming with my cousins in the hayfields. My whole family lived on one road. And while that sounds idyllic, I never waxed poetic about those years, because you know what? I think every time period has its hardships. And like we were just speaking about cell phones and having to call on pay phones and time zones. And there were a lot of hardships during those times that I don't think that we can wax poetic about the good old days either, right? There's a lot of things about today that are better, and there are a lot of things that are worse.
So tell us about your homestead and how it's set up on the 1 acre and how things operate that way, because it's so interesting to me to have such a small space and so many things happening when I look out into the yard and I have all of this space and it's a mess and nothing's happening. So tell me how you do it.
No, and I will say I sound like I've hit the sweet spot or whatever, but it's work. It's always it's hard work. It's not a hustling, but it's hard work. And it's that dedication and that discipline every day that we have to sink into. And that is part of a simple life, though, is doing the hard things and choosing your, there's a saying now called choosing your hard. And I really feel like we have chosen our hard. Like, it is not always easy to get up at 5 a.m., doing what you need to do and be outside by 6. Doing what you need to do in order to look after the animals. So the homestead actually comprises of our home, fruit trees. I'm working slowly. I wish I had started. If I could give somebody one piece of advice, though, if they want to grow their own food, plant your trees now. Do it now, because I wish I had have planted a lot more fruit and nut trees, sort of 20 years ago when we were starting, this. But I was so focused on chickens in a garden then. But I really would encourage anybody that wants to do that to start there. Look at your longer term investments and get those in the ground. So basically, we have a 1/4 acre garden. So it's a large vegetable garden, and it basically we grow, like I mentioned, a lot of food there. I just hauled beets out of the ground this morning and spinach out of the cold frame. So we're still, here we are mid-December, and I'm still being able to haul vegetables out. So that to me is very important that we are, able to still eat fresh, as long as we can.
This week, you'll meet Caroline Fanning.
So my name is Caroline Fanning. I grew up in suburban Long Island, a little town called Amityville on the Great South Bay. And there was no farming in my childhood to speak of other than visiting the Pick Your Own Pumpkin Patch in the fall. I did, however, spend all of my summers at the Amityville beach, where I took swimming lessons and sailing lessons, and then as a teenager became a swim instructor, sail instructor, and guard. So for me, summers were always spent outside. And then when I went off to college, I went upstate to college in Poughkeepsie because I loved upstate New York. My family always vacationed at Lake George, so I had it in my head that I wanted to go to college close to Lake George. And I was having such a wonderful time at college, I didn't want to come home for the summers, so I needed a summer job. The first summer, I got a lifeguarding job at the Vassar Pool, which was indoors. And I started waitressing indoors and really felt like I lost the summer because up to that point, all my summers were spent outdoors. So the following summer, when I knew I would continue staying in Poughkeepsie, I was looking for outdoor opportunities. And that's where I think it was the career development office on campus where I found an ad for a summer apprenticeship at the Poughkeepsie Project, which at the time was a 7-acre organic vegetable farm on the Vassar campus that was doing a community-supported agriculture program and a lot of other educational programs as well. So I hired that summer to be an AmeriCorps farm educator. Myself and several other Vassar students worked with teenagers from Poughkeepsie, and our job was to pretty much develop a farm-based curriculum for these kids. So that meant that our days were spent, like half the week we would actually be farming, just other college students so we could learn about farming. And then the other half of the week, we would try to relay what we had learned ourselves to these high school kids. So it was a great experience. And at the end of that first summer, my biggest takeaway was that I really liked the grunt work. I just liked the hard labor, being out sweating. I like the kids, I like the education, but if I had one choice, it would be to just pumping it in the fields.
So you had mentioned previously that you had basically won the bid that you submitted to the county to even create this farm. Why did they want an organic farm in this? This is kind of something that I don't think I've ever heard of this, to have it kind of in a public space like this. What was the idea from the county to have an organic farm in this space?
Oh, gosh. I wish I knew the exact answer to that. Only the county officials from that time could tell you. But I will say that I guess there were two things going at the same time. One was that in the mid-2000s, Nassau County had approved through a vote a bunch of, I guess, environmental conservation bonds, because open space in Nassau County was almost entirely gone. So Nassau residents wanted to preserve what spaces remained, so they approved all this tax money to buy up what was left. And I guess as there was like a little bit of money left over that had to be, used within the verbiage of the bond, and that money was not enough to buy up any remaining space because it was all, gone. But there was money to put up a building on one of the existing county properties. And the idea for the building was that, well, maybe this building could house a farmer or, farm equipment, and then someone could farm on one of the county parks, so that, this building still qualifies within the terms of the Bond Act. But if, the farm falls by the wayside, at least the county still gets the building out of the deal. I don't know if that makes sense.
This week, you'll meet Alison Weaver. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you got your start in agriculture.
Well, Caitlin, I am a farmer in Lloydminster, Alberta, Saskatchewan. So that's right, the only border city in Canada. We are grain farmers, and I have been living on a farm since the day I was born. And I've always wanted to be on a farm and stay on a farm. And I had the pleasure of finding my husband in university as we were taking agriculture together. And from there, as lots say, it's history. But it's been a wonderful journey. We've had farming together, learning together, raising our children on this farm. And now our children are all launched, and some of them are farming with us. So now I have the pleasure to dibble-dabble in a few other things. And that thing is reaching out to women and sharing our stories so we can support each other and help each other in this crazy world that we live in right now, the crazy world of agriculture, rural living, as we all try to find our space and our place and where we want to be.
Alison, you've done a lot of work with 4-H throughout your entire career. Can you tell us when you started your 4-H journey?
Yes, I can. I was 9 years old when I started my 4-H journey. Back then it was called a Pee-wee member, and you were allowed to be a Pee-wee. And I started in our local little club called Long Laketon Multi. It's actually the longest running, continuing running 4-H club in Canada. And I was welcomed there with open arms. I was not your typical girl, let's put it that way. I didn't want to take home craft. I didn't want to take anything to do with sewing or anything like that. I wanted to be in beef, and I wanted to do horse. And I really wanted to take welding, but that's when my dad told me I had too many things on my plate and my hair was too long, and you're not going to do welding. If you want to weld, I'll teach you how to weld. But anyway, so I went into beef. There was myself and a couple of other girls in the beef project, and then lots of girls in the multi side of it all. And from there, I felt like the world was mine when I was in 4-H. I got to go on 4-H trips, and I got to be part of a wonderful 4-H camp called Camp Rainer. And really, that's where I met my lifelong friends. And my best friend, we met. She was from Lloydminster, Saskatchewan, and I was from Craven, Saskatchewan. And we met at provincial camp. We wrote letters to each other every week, decided which week we'd go to camp again, and are the best of friends. We've raised our kids together. We've done everything together. And so 4-H, to me, I would love every young person in Canada to be in 4-H. If you live in town, if you live in a city, if you live on a farm, just to give you those roots on how to be a community member and how to give back to your community, to use your head, your heart, your health, and your hands to make a stronger person out of yourself and share that with the wider community. I bleed green, Caitlin. I could go on and on about 4-H for hours and hours and hours.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and admin support from Kim & Co. Online. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Kerri Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story.